This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the X-Cast, The Truth is in Here. Thanks for joining our X-Cast Patron Roundtable discussion of Scully's interactions and dynamics with other women characters that have appeared on The X-Files. I am your host, Marlene Stemme. I'm delighted to be joined today by patrons Deana Ferreri. Hey, Deana.
Hey, Marlene.
Hey. Katie Doe.
Hi.
And Cortlan Waters Bartley. Hey, Cortlan.
Hey.
So today we are going to be talking about Scully's relationships with some of the other characters on the show, other female characters. And the whole discussion idea kind of kicked off based on some comments from the episode Kill Switch about Scully's interaction with Esther Nairn. And so we had a lot of thoughts based on whether or not that was a productive relationship or combative, how it started, that really got into like Scully's role, kind of like her law enforcement role, how she's perceived as a woman, depending on who she's dealing with, and then just different personality attributes that kind of come to the fore in some of these relationships. So we're going to go around and we're going to kind of discuss what, piqued our interest in the topic, and then go from there with some different themes and examples. So, Deana, do you want to go first with what interested you in the topic?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like within the fandom, it sort of just gets mentioned in passing, sort of as if just it's known that Scully is sort of adversarial toward other women and that this is sort of problematic. I can't tell you exactly where I've heard that, but I feel like it's something that gets tossed around. And you also notice people have a real problem, it seems, with, like, jealous Scully. I'm doing air quotes, but no one can see me. Like, there seems to be some controversy over, like, Scully when she feels jealous about Mulder. So I sort of find that interesting because I feel like no one gets too upset about Mulder being jealous. Yeah, so I just thought it would be an interesting thing to think about and talk about.
How about you, Katie?
Kind of the same thing. I think, like, it's probably scrutinized more when Scully interacts with other women because there really aren't that many other, like, main female characters. So I think it's probably looked at more. But yeah, it's the same thing as, how when two female characters interact, it can be qualified as, being catty or something like that. But it's more, they can be having a disagreement, but it doesn't necessarily mean one's jealous of the other one or one's being catty or that. So I think looking at it deeper through that kind of lens is beneficial. And yeah, I think there's probably some, there's definitely debate in fandom about that.
What about you, Cortlan?
I mean, I agree with Katie and Deana about sort of the perceptions of Scully's interactions, throughout the show. And I think, too, that we think about it more because Dana Scully is an icon, right? Like, we all sort of universally agree that we have this feminist icon in Dana Scully, and I think that comes with a certain amount of pressure every time she's on screen doing anything. And so I think this is a really interesting topic to consider as Dana Scully, the whole person, and her various attributes and flaws and interactions and friends and not friends and all of that is very interesting, I think, to talk about.
I mean, I think kind of the same. I think that example in particular really made me think about what is a productive relationship or even like an enjoyable relationship, and the expectation that women are going to behave a certain way when they're around each other maybe as well. Because what I took from some of the thoughts from the Scully and Esther Nairn, discussion that we heard was that women are, I can think there's like a latent expectation that women are going to be sweet to each other, or if not, there's a problem. And I don't think that that's necessarily always the best thing. And then also, it's just not Scully's personality. So I just thought that would be, something that would be interesting to talk about. I know we were kind of talking about categories and themes. So, Deana, did you want to get the ball rolling with some of the themes and categories that you had put together?
Sure. The first category I wanted to talk about was collaborative relationships, because I think that one thing that happens is when we look at, like, the show as a whole, most of Scully's interactions with other women are pretty just normal, unremarkable, and so they don't really stick in your head. But like specifically with like other law enforcement or with scientists, like with other people working on the case, there's tons of examples. There's like ICE, Detour, Dr. Carpenter and the Erlenmeyer Flask, Born Again. There's a woman police officer that Scully collaborates with. And it's just sort of, there's just really not a whole lot to say about it. She just works well with another person who happens to be a woman.
Yeah, right away, immediately, as soon as you started talking about that, it made me think of one of my favorite little moments that we get. It's in the episode Soft Light, when she has this relationship with this young detective who is a woman who I guess she taught at Quantico, or I don't know exactly how their relationship came about, but we get this idea that maybe Scully has been mentoring other female law enforcement officers, and we just don't know because that doesn't happen in the X-Files office. So, we don't get to see that, but that's what it immediately jumped into my mind. I mean, I know that episode doesn't end well for that poor girl, but, there's that sort of hint that maybe, Scully has been having these relationships and we just don't see them.
Yeah. Well, she's very protective over her, too. Like, she's defending, she says, like, she's trying to get ahead in a boys' club, which is, like, totally true. So she's trying to, really kind of mentor her through everything and keep her kind of, looking good in the eyes of her fellow officers as well.
Yeah, and I think in that specific example, because I went and because I sort of just remembered like that one little line about the boys' club, so I went back and rewatched it. And actually, what happens to that woman, Detective Ryan, is she's like trying to get ahead in the boys' club, and she asks Scully for help, but she doesn't tell her boss that she's asked for help, and she's afraid to be seen as needing help. So then she sort of later rejects Scully's help and goes off on her own, and like that's when she gets killed. So I feel like
because she can't say that she brought in the FBI and
right. So like by trying to say that she doesn't need any help, she ends up getting killed. Like she's sort of a victim of this idea of a woman is going to be perceived as weak if she needs help.
That's really interesting because I hadn't thought about it in quite that way. I mean, I thought about Scully mentioning the boys' club, but I also thought Scully was torn because she knows that Detective Ryan isn't doing the right thing, and that she's, in some ways augmenting herself to get ahead to the detriment of the case. And so I feel like she's torn between sort of being on the right side of two different things that are at that point incompatible. But I didn't think about it in terms of Detective Ryan needing to ask for help and then just like sort of continually falling back because she's not thinking she's able to ask for help. That's interesting. Katie, did you want to go next? Talking about like whatever. I mean, bring up other relationships, or you could say with the collaborative one too.
Yeah, we could stay with that because I had like when Deana said, when you start to think about it, like the list I made of, Scully working well with other women, it's pretty long when you compare it to the ones that people think of that stick out in your head. Deana mentioned Ann Carpenter, like that's a really early one. That one's fantastic. It's two like female scientists working in the same scene. Like that's amazing. Michelle Spazikis in Detour, that's another one. The doctor in Sixth Extinction. In Agebe. Like I wish we had more scenes of them working together trying to solve. That was amazing. So I think it's just that. And I wrote some stuff about Detour, with Michelle Fazekas. Scully, there's no initial standoffishness. She just, she's a fellow law enforcement officer. She knows her job, so Scully's going to let her do it and follow along. In the episode, Michelle is taken out first because she was seen as, the leader of the group. And, Scully just kind of lets that happen. Not that she lets her get taken, but she lets her kind of do her job that she knows how to do. And, there's more of that throughout the show than anything of her being, seen as jealous or, cantankerous with another character. It is like you don't really note it because it's not remarkable. That doesn't create drama, so that doesn't stick out in your head. So, but I love scenes like that.
I was thinking back to Detour because I think that's an interesting and good example because it's some place that Scully isn't even supposed to be, right? They're not even supposed to be there, and Mulder is kind of I'm not sure that I would say that Mulder I don't know, but like he's clearly leading that and kind of getting in Michelle Fazikas's way a little bit, like inserting himself into what is her case or her investigation, and that's a really interesting example. I know people, like everything you're mentioning is true, and that one never sticks out to me as a particularly important Dana Scully interaction but it's true that they're both sort of in that investigation, and Michelle is clearly leading that one. A good dynamic, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think Scully works well because it's not combative. She's almost like you were saying, like with Mulder. She's like, I think we can manage this on our own.
Right?
It's a little bit more.
Like, why are you even here?
Yeah, right. But I think that Scully works well with women that are as strong as she is. So there's not that. There might be some sort of tension, but I think it's often like an intellectual tension or some initial like working out of what the relationship's going to be. It's like when you mentioned, was it Dr. Amina and Gabe in The Sixth Extinction? That's probably my favorite example. I think I go to that really often in terms of a collaboration that just worked really well for Scully and that I'd like to see more of. And because it starts confrontationally, but then they don't get worked into the emotion or, you said this or thought this. They just immediately start working and have this sort of shared goal and these shared, like, really intellectual interests. And neither one of them has the patience for some sort of, like, intimidation or distraction or anything like that. So I just think that those sort of, again, like forthright intellectual relationships work really well for Scully. And she seems comfortable in that. And I feel like it's engaging and comfortable to watch that. I also mentioned, Dr. Ann Carpenter. I thought about that as well. And that's, again, like just collaboration. And the other one that's a little bit off the beat of that I think has some similarities is in Synchrony, Dr. Lisa Yanelli, who is the girlfriend of the doctor that has the dual self, an older man. And, I mean, she's a fellow scientist, and they're at odds, but Scully's very direct with her, and she's, she thinks that Lisa may or may not be telling the truth, but it's kind of a direct relationship, and they're both very work-oriented. And the thing that she says to her about Jason is, it's just like, if he would lie for you, what makes you think he wouldn't lie to you? And I just think that's such an honest and direct way of dealing with somebody. So I think, to me, those are the things where I tend to see, like, Scully having a really strong positive relationship.
Yeah, like if it's a professional person doing their job properly, then, like, yeah, they may disagree, but they're able to work, towards the betterment of solving the case or whatever they're doing.
Right.
Well, and I think, too, that so much of what people might say is Dana Scully behaving confrontationally is actually just Dana Scully approaching things with the skepticism that is, like, the foundation of her character. Dana Scully is the skeptic, and I think that she approaches people, especially new people, with a healthy skepticism. Maybe sometimes that's skepticism of their motivation, but it could also just be her general approach to solving any given case that they're working on. So maybe they disagree, but I don't think that it's confrontational necessarily. I think it's just her approach to solving a problem.
Well, I feel like the motto of the show is trust no one, and her guard always has to be kind of up because she's always, she's not going to take anyone just at face value what they're saying. She's encountered plenty of liars and things like that. So I think that's part of it, going into it not being totally open-minded. You have to really get information first and then, see if the person is worthy of that kind of interaction.
So I was thinking about that, actually. I think there are lots and lots of examples where people say, oh, Scully is jealous over Mulder, whatever. But one that sticks out in my mind is Karen Bergquist from Alpha, because I really think that she's just skeptical of what they're doing. She's approaching it with a skepticism about the case, and she knows that maybe Karen Bergquist isn't being honest. So that comes off as really confrontational and maybe jealous. I don't know. I'm never quite sure if I think that she's jealous in that moment.
I'm glad you brought that one up, because I think also that there are a couple of instances where people sort of call it jealous, but actually it's just that Scully has a really good reason to be skeptical of this person's motives. And Karen Bergquist is one example of that. There is a weird interaction in that episode that I really don't get, but that's like a separate issue. But also like Phoebe Green in Fire. It's like... Scully has her guard up because Phoebe plays this trick on them when Mulder and Scully like plays that tape in their car that's like really mean, you know,
and manipulative.
Yeah,
and
she's
manipulative.
playing
So
mind
like
games,
Scully
yeah.
is like, yeah, like Cortlan said, it's a healthy skepticism of this person. That's really not jealousy.
Yeah, no, I agree.
No, a healthy skepticism, or like while you were talking, Cortland, I was thinking that it also, like with Karen Berkowitz, it's more protectiveness. Like that's not the same as jealousy either. And I think in that instance, that is what that was, you know, some skepticism of Karen's motives, and then also just being protective of Mulder, but not necessarily in a jealous way.
Yeah, I
it's
think
like-
that's the case for Phoebe Green in Fire. It's like Scully can see that she's messing with Mulder's head, and she's being protective.
Yeah, when that comes off, it's more, you know, she's kind of more upset with Mulder that he's kind of shirking his duties. You know, they're down there dancing, and they're not. She's doing, in that case, she does all the work to solve it.
Right?
And the same with Karen too. Yeah, it's
All the work.
yeah. She comes and says, "Oh, here's all the information you need," and they're down there in the ballroom
Right.
dancing. I never took it as romantic kind of jealousy. It was more, you know, protecting their space, and she sees what Phoebe's doing to Mulder, and she's annoyed with him, but she's protecting him as well. And I think, you know, the same cases with Alpha too. That she's
Well, and I don't know. I think it's. I agree. I don't think, especially I think in Fire, I don't ever think that there's romantic jealousy there. I just don't think that's what's happening, especially that early in the run of the show. I don't think we have any reason to suspect that that's what is happening. But even if Scully is jealous, I'm not sure that that's. I don't know. It's just a part of her. Like, if that's true, like then it's just a part of her. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a character flaw, but I think that she's entitled to have some character flaws.
Yeah,
That's a good
definitely.
point too.
yeah, she's allowed to be human. I think, like Cortland brought up earlier, you know, she's this like feminist icon, and so we put her up on a pedestal, and then like sometimes we get disappointed when she does things that are just like regular human flaws.
Right.
Like it is human
Right.
to feel jealous sometimes.
Yeah. And even just territorial too. Like these people are coming into what, you know, she and Mulder have built, and they're, you know, she's already defensive because they're in the basement in the FBI. They're on the sidelines. She's constantly having to prove herself with the nature of her job. She has to like prove everything, and you know, if someone comes in and disrupts that or tries to, you know, take that down, of course you're going to defend your territory.
And sometimes it's done like lesser work, like from the upstairs world, can come and interfere.
Right,
I could
right.
see her being, yeah.
I'm thinking of one really giant example that we haven't really talked about yet. That goes by
What would that be?
goes by the name of
Just go
Deana
for it.
Fowley.
I figured that was, yeah.
That's definitely an instance where I think we see some of maybe Scully's character flaws that we, you know, maybe are disappointing, but are still human and valid, but also with a pretty healthy dose of skepticism there, I think, in her approach to Deana Fowley's sudden appearance. And
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like a little of both there because, I mean, first of all, the way Mulder introduces Fowley to Scully is like really not, it's tactless, you know, so Scully starts out sort of being suspicious of this person because the way that Mulder's being so secretive about what their relationship was. So yeah, there's probably some romantic jealousy there, which again is just human. And I sort of like when Scully's human because I find her like more relatable when she has like, you know, those little human moments and she's not just like a superhero. But in addition, she can also see that there's reason to be skeptical of Deana, that Deana might have ulterior motives, and she gets really frustrated with Mulder because Mulder is completely blind to that. So I think you can view that as partly protective also, or at least protective of the two of them and of Mulder and Scully and their work.
The work
Definitely,
they built,
yeah.
I really like in the end when Scully is, I think she's aware that she's acting from more than one motivation. Like one is definitely above board and, you know, legitimate, and not that the jealousy aspect's not legitimate, but I like the moment when she like calls to like tell him to come over or something like that. She sees him with Diana and then calls him later.
I
love that scene.
And leaves and walks past.
And she sits in the car and she
sits in the car
crestfallen.
And they have that moment where they show the look on her face, which is just brilliant, because I think it is like she's realizing like I shouldn't be doing it for this reason, but I have anyway, kind of, or she's just sort of aware of her own emotion, I think, about what she's doing at that time, and I really like seeing that.
I think
it's very.
I think part of it, she just feels unneeded now because Diana's here. Like she's very at ease talking about X-Files topics with Mulder, and like they've kind of
she's not a skeptic
to take care of Gibson. Exactly, yeah. Mulder can just talk with Diana. He leaves and says, "Diana, you know what to do," and that's it. And like Scully's left to do nothing, and
it's just like,
I think that moment sitting in the car, she just looks crestfallen, like. Maybe I'm not as important right now as I thought I was. And I think that's completely human. That's totally fine.
Yeah, and it's sort of like that moment goes to like the nature of Mulder and Scully's relationship a little bit because it's not exactly defined as like a romantic relationship, a life partnership, whatever. I mean, to me, that moment is like Scully seeing how fragile their relationship is if someone else can come in and just, if Diana can just come in and start working with Mulder and Scully is just sort of cast to the side.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely like the easier relationship, I think, for Mulder to have. Not necessarily, obviously, the better one, but it's definitely easier for him to talk to Diana probably, or more automatic in some ways. So Scully's reaction to that, I think it is very human. I kind of think she knows that there's like some ways that she's acting toward Diana, again, that are like based not just on skepticism for the work.
And to be fair, I mean, that's coming on both sides. Like Diana's doing the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that definitely goes. Yeah. That particular dynamic definitely goes both ways.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like Gibson doesn't help by like stoking the fire.
Oh
no, he's a little instigator.
You're wondering about each other.
Yeah, well, and just the fact that they give Mulder and Diana Fowley this history, they were in an actual like romantic relationship. That I think it's sort of it puts Scully in a really weird position where like, Mulder and Scully are basically life partners without saying it, but they aren't actually romantic partners. And Diana's had this sort of intimacy with him that she hasn't. It really complicates things, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely meant to stir the pot there. It's definitely meant to throw things off.
Well, plus her too, like her saying like, I was there when the X-Files started. We found it together. So that's like another kind of shared history they have as well.
Yeah, I think that's the more, both of those, like professional and personal relationships are sort of like the more obvious relationship. So it's difficult, like when you don't have something that's defined, to be like, oh, but we have this. It might be more meaningful on this side, but like, what is it?
Right.
And how to deal with that interaction. I think that a lot of these examples are things like Scully, I don't want to say doesn't do well, but I think it's difficult. Like if she has to wade through something to get to the truth or to get to an explanation, whether it's with Diana or with like Karen Berquist, or even in situations where the other person, the other woman is not as direct as she is. I almost think that makes her a bit testier, if it's an appropriate term to use for her. Just because it's not like, okay, this is that, we're going now. It's more having to kind of like figure out whether it's, what's actually going on in a situation like with Diana or Karen, or what's emotionally going on. I think that makes things more difficult for her. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I think it just takes, you have to spend time on that, and then you lose time on actually, getting to the science, solving the case, whatever they're doing. It just, she doesn't have time for wading through all this extra, like, high school, air quotes, kind of thing that's happening. It was funny. I was talking to my sister earlier just about this, and she gave me a really good quote saying that Scully don't suffer fools. And so that was about it.
Yeah.
That does kind of sound
I think she just doesn't have time for it. That's not what she's interested in.
I think that's it too. I think it's her interest as well as just like being like probably in her mind a little bit of a waste of time. And not something that she's geared to do. Deana, did you have any more categories that you wanted to go through?
I do. And actually, let me just tell you what they are, and we can see what sounds good to talk about next. Sort of related to the collaborative relationships, I had sort of protective, and I actually put soft light in that category, but also Firewalker, and although it's not exactly interactions, it's sort of Scully feeling protective in Too Shy, in Unruhe, and then sort of related to that, her relationship with some of the fellow abductees. Like, the protective ones in these are sort of like, Scully's sort of warm, but like after a little period of resistance. And then, I have the ones that are sort of like jealousy, like War of the Coprophages and Syzygy. And then Scully interacting with like victims or suspects or witnesses and in a way that we might call less than empathetic, or at least less empathetic than Mulder.
Yeah. The protective one made me think of like a couple things related to just emotional relationships that Scully has where she is the person that's needing help versus, and I hadn't thought about it in the sense of like the other way about that would be being the protective person.
Yeah, you notice, I mean, the reason I thought of that category was like a lot of times, I mean, in general, Mulder is the more empathetic one. That's just sort of, that's his personality. Definitely. There are certain instances where it seems like the case sort of like hits Scully kind of hard and she gets sort of protective. And I think this specifically has to do with women. So like in Unruhe, there's this one scene where, they're looking for the one woman who had been kidnapped and by, I forget his name, the villain.
Gerald Snow.
Yes. And they find her and she's already dead, or she's already been, attacked by Gerald. And Scully just walks away and sits in the car, and she's just so dejected. And I think it's just that it gets really, some of the crimes against women get really personal, and she feels really protective toward the victims. And I just think it's notable because she usually sort of holds back on the empathy. And I think in Too Shy also, she has this conversation with Encanto at the end about how he not only, attacked these women, how he preyed on their minds. He made them think he was in love with them. He was this really just cruel thing. And so those things sort of stick out for me.
Firewalker is on my list as well as a really interesting example of Scully as a protector, kind of like you said, but also as like that dynamic being a little bit of a mirror, and that's like a story we don't know about Dana Scully yet. At that point, when we watch Firewalker, we haven't seen all things, so we don't know about that part of her past. But if you listen to the story or the history, and I can't remember the woman's name in Firewalker now, of course, but Jessie, yes. Jessie tells this story about having a relationship with her coworker and like the drive and all of these things that are also true of Dana Scully. We just don't know it yet. And I think that there are, because maybe, and this is just because it's a constant theme of the show, there's this tendency for her to have that dynamic with other women who are also victims of violence or of the general storyline, right? Because Dana Scully is also sometimes the victim of whatever story plot is happening. And so there's like that sort of protective but also like mirrored experience. It's really hard to, I guess, explain.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about Jessie. And I think also that we do have a little inkling of that from Lazarus.
Sure.
Because we know that person also, I don't know if he was her instructor. I thought he was either her instructor, but like at the academy. So it was a similar sort of dynamic. And I think, yes, right. So I think, she, because it sort of mirrored her own experience. Right. Yes, she had a lot more empathy for Jessie.
I think those are really interesting examples because it's almost like she uses her, her power in her role and just as a person and empathy for people that are like when she's being protective. And maybe that's a way for her to be sort of reserved but still emotional at the same time. I mean, she obviously is like caring for the people themselves, but I think of her as being protective in those situations that you've talked about. But then in a situation like, let's say I always think of Karen Kossoff as somebody that she has a really awkward dynamic with, the therapist, because Karen is so just openly emotional and almost effusive, and it makes Scully seem even more reserved. And I think it's a good therapeutic relationship, because Scully goes back to see her in Elegy after like talking to her in Irresistible, so you kind of get the sense that she finds value in that. But at the same time, I just think that the way that Karen addresses these issues isn't the way that Scully would express herself at all, so I think when she's being protective, she's able to still be a little bit removed from the situation too, and that's just her personality, I would say.
I think it's her personality, but I also think there's some like workplace psychology in that. So I did this like little mini dive into some workplace psychology research, because it was because of the idea of Mulder's really the more empathetic one in a lot of situations, and Scully does sort of hold it back. I think the writers were pretty aware that when a woman is in a male-dominated profession, she often sort of turns off some of her stereotypical female traits. And so there's actually like a bunch of research on this, like from the 1970s. What I found really interesting about it, and I'm going to find this little snippet to read, was that there are sort of societal expectations of how women behave in the workplace. This woman who did the research, Rosabeth Moss Cantor, her hypothesis was it isn't like a sex difference in the way people behave. It has to do with the numbers of the dominant group and the not dominant group. In law enforcement, for example, like women would be the minority group. And like the number here is like about 15%. So you're saying like in a group of like 10 to 12 people working together, you only have like maybe one, maybe two women. But they actually found the same thing in groups that were like nurses, for example, where it's mostly women and men are the minority group. What they write in this paper, it's an examination of like tokenism, how like when there's only a small percentage of a certain group, there are these sort of predictable behaviors that happen. And basically what happens is the minority group, like they could go one or two ways. They either decide to be a loner and an overachiever and just like not be part of the group, or they try to sort of demonstrate their loyalty to the group. And they often do that by like turning against their own category. The quote here, so they can try to become insiders, proving their loyalty by defining themselves as exceptions and turning against their own social category. The occurrence of this response suggests a reexamination of the popularized women prejudiced against women hypothesis, or the queen bee syndrome, as opposed to possible numerical rather than sexual origins. So I think there's this idea out there that women don't tolerate other women in their workplace, that like women are always, at odds with other women, but that actually this is just a result of the different numbers of men and women in a certain profession, and it actually can work the other way. I think that when writing the show, they were picking up on one like positive aspect of this, or rather a non-negative aspect of this, which is that, like a woman in a male-dominated profession a lot of times is going to, for the sake of being seen as one of the group, like be a little less empathetic, being a little less, things you'd see as stereotypically female, like nurturing, I don't know, things like that.
Emotional and...
Yeah, but that's where you get like it. But they also sort of, to be seen as part of the group, they sort of want to seem like, oh, I'm like the cool girl, I'm the cool woman, I'm not like the other women, but it sort of happens subconsciously. Yeah. And I think this is where this perception of like cattiness comes from, which is like a real negative thing, but it's actually just sort of a survival mechanism in the situation where you're in a male-dominated profession. So I think like when we're talking about Scully, a lot of times sort of holding back on empathy, that, could have a lot to do with that.
I have a question about that. Do you think that she is holding back on empathy, or do you think that other people that have that possibly subconscious bias are perceiving her as holding back on empathy in the workplace because of a way that she's supposed to be, like one of those two?
That's a really good question, actually. I'd have to give that some, or maybe it's just like in contrast to Mulder, who is like so empathetic. I mean, he can afford to be because he's a man, but like that's a good question of like, are we just perceiving her that way, or like because Mulder is like so the opposite?
Yeah, well, it's like,
and she's just like being professional. Yeah,
it's like the way other characters could perceive her differently in the show. like in that story, then the audience sees it too. So it's definitely based on perception as well. That was a really interesting kind of research you did. That was good.
Well, yeah. I think too it's really interesting because we also have, I mean, admittedly fewer examples, but we also have a fair amount of Dana Scully interacting not at work with other women. In fact, arguably, like her longest, I mean, obviously her mom is the longest running female relationship that we get to see. And sort of in season 1, they lead a little, like she has a friend who she's the godmother for, and, you know, she goes to the cello. Like she has friends in season 1, although we don't see them ever again.
Sort of like you see them being
right, we never see them again. Right.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of women at that baby shower, and I always wonder, who are they?
Oh, wait,
I always
her mom rounded them up.
I was like, I'm pretty sure those are her mom's friends. Maggie Scully threw her a baby shower for her Maggie's friends, which
because she doesn't seem super delighted. Scully
No.
doesn't seem like just driven with delight to be there.
And yes, I mean, I don't have any kids, so I've never been in the position to have a baby shower. But I am married, and I was forced to have a wedding shower that I did not want.
I was also,
and so awful. I could totally in that moment I feel for Scully really hard. Yeah,
there was definitely some. You know, Mom, I really don't want like any of these weird games. I really don't want to open all the presents in front of everybody. And she's like, no, that's why people come.
You're doing it. You're doing it.
Right.
You're doing it. I was like, okay.
I was told that I had to have that. Yeah, I could totally am. I'm on the same page there about that. But anyway, but we do have examples. Right.
Back to the point.
We do have examples of Dana Scully interacting or having a relationship with other women outside of work. I mean, they're few and far between, right? Mostly they're her family, which comes with its own fair share of history and, you know, family dynamic that could change that. But so I don't know. I was just wondering, Deana, do you feel like her level of empathy is notably different?
I do, but I guess I'm thinking, well, yeah, like with her mom. I mean, we only get to see her sister for a couple of seasons, but I guess the relationships I would think of as sort of outside of work would be like Cassandra Spender, sort of peripheral to work. And I forget if it's Penny Northern or Betsy Hagopian. I get those two names mixed up. But in Memento Mori.
It's Penny Northern.
And those are like really warm, empathetic relationships. But I think also she's outside of her job duties, like sort of, at least with Cassandra, and it's also like this shared trauma that they have, and she's even a little resistant toward really accepting that. And I wouldn't take that to any like the workplace stuff. I would just say that, like, I mean, no one really wants to see themselves as a victim or feel vulnerable in that way, and I think that's sort of why she resists it.
Yeah,
especially she was thrown into it too with no warning as well. Like it's your sudden.
Yeah, that's true.
This is sprung on you, and
that's why I guess I keep seeing these things in terms of personality, because she's not. But I think it's a good point that it's thrown on her, and it is something related to trauma in a lot of these cases. But she's not responding with the same sort of emotion that she's receiving from these people. So to me, it's more that she is a little bit more distant, I guess, and having to process how other women are very emotionally open in sort of a way that she would get right to the point intellectually. Because I think that there's. And maybe it's me. I think, like, with Penny Northern, it's a very warm, genuine relationship, but there's an awkwardness to it as well.
Yeah.
That I think makes it more powerful, but I think that it is, like, she's kind of caught in whatever the expression that's coming from Penny Northern and can't deal with it.
I think it's too, she, Penny knows more than she does. She remembers seeing Scully. Scully has no memory. So if someone's telling you, you were here, I saw you did this, I sat with you, you don't remember it, so I think you're at a disadvantage too. You don't really want to open up, and you can't because you don't know what happened. And
right, she's not in a position to access that kind of emotional memory. She does not have that. So
yeah. Well, I was just saying, like, that relationship, like, it grows really quickly. Like, she, they're comforting each other, and she is devastated when she passes away. So I think she allows herself to open up very fast. She's with her after the chemo. Like, she lets her guard down. So I think initially it might be a little uncomfortable, but she definitely needs her there. And I think it's a very kind of give and take relationship for that short time.
I think you can relate that a little bit to what Marlene was saying earlier about the therapist. How, it's sort of a personality thing that is, regardless of your gender, a lot of people are not comfortable really opening up emotionally, or, only comfortable up to a certain point. And that's definitely part of Scully's personality.
Well, it's like an internal protection, too, kind of. It's.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
I think,
that's a good way to describe it.
Standoffish is a word to describe, like, the outward appearance of it, but I think, like, you're just being protective of yourself, too.
And I think, one of the things, right, that we were sort of touching on, so many of these relationships that she has, we only get to see over a really short or quick period of time. And I think it's pretty clear that Scully is a person who relies on, like, that kind of shared experience and time to build that emotional, like, trust. So I think it's hard for us to, sometimes I think it's hard for us to see her as being anything other than reserved or distant, because there's no time for her to be anything else. It's hard hard for it to get that far, I think.
Well, you never see her interacting. She doesn't have just like a girlfriend that hangs out. Like, it's just that one woman in Jersey Devil, and then that's pretty much it.
Right.
Hang out after work and go, chat and everything. You never see her having that easy kind of conversation with a friend.
Or even with her mom, I think. Like, even the interactions with her mom are always like, they're always sort of like tied to the case or to the, the mythology in some way. There's like not much casual conversation going on.
Or even like Melissa might come the closest, but even then it's, they're talking about, her repressed memories and things, and like that, she shuts off pretty fast.
So
I think Melissa too.
I was just going to say, and I know I'm about to open another can of worms, but I was just going to bring up Monica Reyes as the Scully sort of friend relationship that we get later. I think very late, right? Very late in the game. But I do think that, I don't want to say it's a replacement for Melissa, because that's not accurate. But I think that we see that at the beginning with Melissa Scully, where they do have a little bit of that. I think that's what Katie was saying, where they have those conversations, although they are still frequently about trauma. But then later, that's also kind of what she gets with Monica Reyes too, is that they're always working or peripheral to work, in that they're dealing with like William and conspiracy and all of that as well.
I never thought about how Monica's personality is sort of similar to Melissa's. Yeah. And you could see how like that would be sort of comforting.
I think it helps make it feel more familiar for Scully faster.
Yeah.
I do too. Yeah. I think you get the sense that she may recognize that on some level.
Well, I think she says it. I think she says it pretty outright in Existence.
Okay, that's what I was imagining.
It's a weird timing. Yeah. The timing of that is a little odd, but But I do think that later, right? But I do think, right, it kind of also touches on what Deana was saying earlier about it being work adjacent, because we get a lot of, maybe a lot is a strong word, but we get some time where Scully and Monica Reyes are like in Scully's home, and they're not, they're not necessarily like in the office, or I don't know. So they have a more personal relationship than just work, I guess.
I think it's a good comparison to Melissa, because they both, I was going to say, like, Melissa kind of openly drifts through life's experiences, and I think Monica is definitely more directed, but that sort of, like, that openness definitely characterizes both, whereas Scully kind of holds back, I think, and analyzes and observes first. And you're saying that she doesn't have the time to sort of, like, build emotional trust, I guess. And I think she just, to me, it seems like she processes everything, emotion internally. Process thought like with someone in the moment, that she's emotionally processing internally, and maybe takes a little bit longer, which I see that reflected with her family, like with her mom and her sister as well, because I think that with her mom, she has a warm relationship, but her mom still seems to like not quite understand why Scully seems a little closed off at times, or maybe she understands it, but she just doesn't think it's healthy, or doesn't, I don't know. I think Scully kind of seems like she's her own like little private island of thought, even with her mom.
Yeah, she holds back that she's getting cancer treatment and for a long time, and like that, it could be she didn't want to worry her, or she just doesn't want to deal with that emotional conversation they're going to have once she finds out.
In the blessing way, when she's carrying her shoes to her mom's house, I love that scene. And it's very emotional, and Scully's crying, but at the same time, she's still kind of talking about work, and she's still holding back, you know, which is why I think that to a degree is just how she, for whatever reason, has to handle things.
But she goes there, you know, she needs comforting at that point. It's kind of like the one place she can go. And that, like, in Wet-Wired, she goes there. It's
Same
like
thing,
the one place she feels safe. And
I think that kind of, too, touches on, this show is about their work and their mission, their kind of, like, mission at work. And it's very work-centered, which is what the show is about. I mean, that's, you know, it's what we have. But I think it's hard sometimes to reconcile the, like, personal, professional part, like, facets of the show. And so I think it's hard sometimes. Of course, Scully is there at her mom's talking about work because that's what the show is about. You know what I mean? I think it's hard to.
Right, yeah.
I think
The
it's
show
hard
needs to keep
to
a
say, like,
focus.
do we want some scenes in the X-Files with Scully sitting around her mom's kitchen table? I'm not sure how well any of that would go over or how important it would be to the whole story.
it works when it fits in with the case or with the main storyline. But yeah, I mean, that's why they kind of they cut out her like boyfriend early on in the, you know, he was taken on.
Yeah.
It's like it's too much. It becomes like
Yeah, and after
little
season
bit
one,
fun, a
and
little
after
bit
season
soapy.
one, she didn't have any more friends. And,
Exactly.
You know, it's like they're just like, yeah, this is too much. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Of like, there was a decision made about like, yeah, this show is about the work, and the rest of it's going to stay peripheral.
Right. I don't know that we're trying to define a dynamic here, but we don't have anything else to go off of except for what we see of Dana Scully at work or peripheral to work.
yeah, we get bits and
So
pieces.
sometimes I think that maybe colors our perception of what that is because it's all we see.
We did a fan fiction roundtable last week. We're talking about like one of the appeals to people of fan fiction is that you can explore the interior of the characters, and Scully gives a sense of having like a strong interior life. And so I think part of that is you can see that in her at work, but it's like, what else might there be afterwards or like outside of that, you know? And just speculating or going by what you see of her at work, what she's like. So I think that there are all these questions on like, what is she like in her personality and so forth, just because that is the area in which we see her, maybe, if that makes sense.
I think we would be remiss to not bring up Dr. Bambi Barenbaum and Detective White.
They're right here in my right here in my notes.
I got
Which I think those are actually kind of difficult to really analyze in any serious way, because these are comedy episodes, so they're sort of meant to be a little bit, well, like, you know, War of the Coprophages is supposed to be a little bit, you know, over the top. Like, Bambi's sort of a cliche, the name at least.
yeah.
Right. Oh, and the person.
And she's really... She's exaggerated.
The scientist was, this hysterical twist on the exaggeration, but yeah.
The one,
Like everybody's a little bit exaggerated in their behaviors in both of those, I would say.
yeah, Susan G, you can't really take seriously, I don't think, as a character study.
Yeah, because I mean they're both supposed to be they're both supposed to be under the influence of like some sort of like astrological thing going on. So it's like nobody has a filter, basically. So
it is kind of funny. Those two, they follow each other, so it's like 2 episodes of Scully being
it is so
more
strange.
heightenedly kind of like jealous of other women. I mean, the one thing in War of the
And
Coprophages,
superficially, too.
like that. The one thing that's weird, Mulder's talking about, you know, he met an entomologist, and Scully says, "Did he give you any information?" And he says, "She." And, like, she picks up on that, like, she, which seems weird because I don't see why she would find just a female scientist strange. Yeah.
Right.
So, but the rest of it is, you know, Bambi. It's funny, but that one line, it seems kind of weirdly, it sticks out.
yeah, that one I wrote that down too. That one line like sort of bothers me, and I don't know if I guess it's a combination of, I don't know, maybe you hear entomologist, like somebody who studies insects, and maybe that sounds like something men would be more interested in. I don't know.
Yeah.
As like an aside, when I'm reading papers in science journals for work, sometimes you just see like the last names, and like you click on the paper to see the full text, and then you see all the names. And I always feel this sort of quick surprise whenever I see a female first name. And it angers me that I feel that.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think it's just this thing that we've all sort of grown up with, where we've seen certain professions as male or female, and it takes a lot of undoing. It takes so many years of undoing. So like maybe that's part of it. And then also I get like just the fact that Mulder's really taking her, this line happens before that, but when Mulder starts talking about the nocturnal insect swarms
The theory.
thing, and how he's actually taking this seriously. I could see how Scully would be a little bit annoyed with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And again, she's been solving all the cases,
Yeah.
and now he keeps hanging up on her. Like, that's kind of,
Right.
she's doing all the work again.
I took that as not necessarily her reacting to that a scientist would necessarily be a man, but that Mulder was carrying on and on about this person, and then Scully, like, it is kind of a jealousy, a surface jealousy, like she.
Yeah,
Telling me all
I
of
feel
this,
like
and
that
this
was
person
like
you're so excited about. It's
that
like,
was
In the middle of the night.
intention.
Yeah.
right.
I think it's especially with Syzygy, but also with Thor of the Copperphages. They are both episodes that are sort of meant to amplify specific traits in everyone, and so maybe this is the amplificate. Like, maybe this is a confirmation that sometimes Scully is jealous. Like, that maybe is part of her nature, and we just see a lot of it back to back in those two little.
Yeah, and like
little
Mulder
episodes,
kept
but-
telling her not to come up, and suddenly
Right.
he found another, like, a fun partner to work with.
Right.
A fun part.
And I think you can actually parallel it with Bad Blood a little bit. And again, it's like nobody talks about jealous Mulder.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, and more of the Copperfish, it's sort of this play, like it gets sort of playful. Like Scully's sort of teasing him about being a little bit infatuated
Oh, definitely.
with Bambi, and it's sort of the same way Mulder does in Bad Blood with the sheriff, which again is a comedy where things are amplified, and maybe you're seeing a little more of what's going on in the person's head instead of what they would actually do.
Coming out, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder with Syzygy if that were a sort of a straightforward, like, serious story. Detective White seems like she could be the type of law enforcement person that would get along and work well with Scully if they didn't have all of the other going on. Just because there's something that's kind of, I mean, she's kind of bumbling a bit, I guess, but she seems like she has a straightforward side that would work well with Scully if they didn't have all this other, interference.
Yeah, they probably could have had a more productive discussion about the stuff in the beginning, the cult stuff.
Cult.
Except that Scully had completely lost patience with everything by that early in the episode. So she's just sort of eye-rolling or whatever instead of just sort of stating the facts that, well, actually, all of the research done by the FBI says this. And then they could have, they probably could have.
Yeah, I think that they both would be good skeptics. I mean, Scully is a good skeptical eye roller, and I think Detective White had that going on as well. So maybe that's why I thought that they would have a good rapport if they'd had that chance.
Although I do think Scully was slightly annoyed by the thing in the beginning where apparently Detective White interviewed the two girls together, which I guess she should have known not to do.
Yes.
I feel like that got on Scully's nerves too, which was heightened because of.
Well, she's just taking everything at face value. The detective, she has no sort of.
She's a little. She is very trusting.
Yeah,
she's pretty trusting of the people in town.
That's what we have to do. Yeah, that's true.
It is funny though. As the minute they arrive in town, Scully. It's like she's had all this kind of pressure from the planet alignment on her already, but she's just gotten there and she's already going off on. So I don't know if she arrived kind of annoyed to begin with, or if it was kind of building up on the way, but it's pretty strong for someone who just got there when it's the townspeople have had it pressing on them for a while to build up.
Yeah. Do you have anything else in that category, Deana?
I don't. No, unless I don't know if you wanted to end with talking a little more about Kill Switch, and then I think we've pretty much exhausted the topic. I think we've done it.
I don't think you can ever exhaust. There's so many examples.
I know there's just so many. Yeah, there's so many.
I was going to bring up just one more.
Yeah,
Aubrey.
Oh yeah,
Aubrey. Okay,
That's great.
That's a good one.
The episode really makes a point of Scully's a woman. She has woman's intuition. She's connecting with BJ. She knows BJ's in a relationship. She can tell she's pregnant. It seems really stressing that for this one episode.
Scully is a psychic woman.
Exactly. Yeah. She's a woman knows. So that would.
Oh, I'd have to watch that one again. I don't have a good memory of.
Oh yeah, and
of that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's so fascinated. She's really kind of
it's how do you know that?
She's coming up with all this stuff, right?
But
she's showing him up on the intuition front.
But it's kind of a good example of her connecting, because BJ can kind of be a fellow law enforcement officer, but she's also a victim and a suspect, really. So it's but Scully really kind of tries to connect with her, and she's not doing it in a confrontational way. She's trying to get her to open up, I think, so she can.
Yeah,
some
I
more.
think it's genuine, but I also think she's trying to kind of shake her down a bit as well, because she is a suspect.
A little bit,
So
yeah,
I
because
think
she can
it's
tell she's definitely lying.
mixed, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I have my notes about that one is another one that I would say falls into the situation where it's once again Scully talking to another woman about this like workplace relationship that is a secret and, you know, maybe has some suspicious overtones. I always think that one is interesting. And again, she's psychically linked, I guess, to that. The woman's intuition thing is a little weird, I think, but
Yeah.
it's all right. It's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Well, it moves the story along
is, too.
also, too, so I think that was probably... You know, Scully needs to find this out, so we'll just make her really perceptive about it.
Yes, it is expedient, yeah.
What else did you want to say about Esther Nairn and Killswitch and Visigoth?
The one thing about Killswitch that sort of bothers me is I feel like Scully is written a little bit out of character. I feel like there's a level of hostility and a duration of hostility that just goes on for too long into the episode before, like, it turns into this really nice, warm, and collaborative relationship. And Scully's right to be skeptical of Invisigoth at first because, you know, she tases her and then, like, almost gets them blown up. Right. But it just sort of, it goes into, like, hostility. And it's sort of, I don't know, I find it jarring every time because it doesn't really seem like Scully.
I think that she is a little hostile, yeah. I've always taken that as part of Scully's, I don't think that she appreciates that they're breaking the law, right? Like, I think that part of it is Scully's, this is wrong, no matter what. That's kind of how I've always taken that hostility, like, because it does take a while for her to become less irritated by the situation, I guess.
Yeah. I think that Esther is sort of an irritating character, though. I mean, I like her, but she's not really giving anything at the start either.
No.
You know, and I agree that it goes on for a while, and Scully is still, given her role, you know, more, maybe more combative for a longer period of time than is warranted. But I also rather like that they're two women that aren't afraid to use the combative aspects of their personality. And it's almost through that they kind of come to this, like, you know, understanding, like sort of an emotional understanding, I think, in the scene in the car when Esther learns that David, that was her...
David.
He died in the explosion, yeah.
And is very emotional about it, but it's like, that happens, and Scully is sympathetic to, like, a Scully degree of kind of, like, putting her hand on her shoulder. And then after that, they're sort of on the same page. So I do like the way that transpired.
Well, I think she sees, too, that Esther has this, like, facade that she puts up as well. And, like, in that moment you talked about, like, it drops. She's just, you know, heartbroken and crying. And, it's a regular person that she's dealing with now.
Yeah.
What I had in my notes is that I think they're almost like the strong silent types emotionally, but they have deep private feelings, and it comes out in that scene. That's how I saw them as being sort of similar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we'll start with our friend Kurt North, who says only, well, she's a bit snooty to Diana, for starters. So he's not happy with the way Scully behaves towards Diana, who is apparently his favorite person.
There could be a little Diana bias in that.
That could be.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone that doesn't behave properly toward Diana is on his...
So everyone then. Everyone.
Pretty much.
I think snooty implies like a hierarchical feeling.
Like superiority.
You know? Yeah. And I don't, I mean, maybe. I think that she's much more afraid of Diana Fowley than anything. And so I think that comes off as her sort of like defensiveness as opposed to snooty. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Diana is somewhat threatening.
Yeah.
I think we didn't use that word before, but I think that's what we're getting toward.
I think that, she's a lot more defensive toward Diana Fowley than snooty.
Yeah, and she can never tell her motives either. Like, it's not really until the very end, you know, after she learns Diana is dead, that she tells them, you know, she knows she was your friend, and she actually did help me to find you, so she...
Yeah, well, and also the audience knows a lot more about Diana than Mulder or Scully. I think that makes the audience want to dislike Diana a little more. Mulder's completely blind to anything. Scully sort of knows something up, but the audience knows, there is definitely something up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, yeah, there's more than meets the eye, and you get the sense that they can tell that, but they don't know what it is. Or
Scully can, yeah.
Know what it is. Sarah Blair says that one of her favorite moments is in Detour when Scully and Michelle Fazekas work together. And she said there's mutual respect, kind of like a little bit like we talked about, between them that she said she'd like to have explored more, and that they recognize each other's capability, which doesn't happen often. And then she also mentions that she and Reyes did great together too. And then she mentioned improbable. She says, I really love when they get to investigate together. They make a fantastic team. And I liked that mention because I think that's an episode that doesn't really have to do with, the sort of the emotional depths of what they're working on or even the intricacies of the conspiracy. And it is just investigating from their two different perspectives. So I thought that was a good comment.
I think that I like season 9 a lot more than the general feeling about season 9. I mean, Improbable is a really good, another comedy, so harder maybe to nail down. But I think that season 9 is at its best when it has those two working together to solve a thing.
Yeah, that is like one of the main points I like about season 9 is
I think some of its strongest moments I think are usually centered around that dynamic. I don't think we spent a lot of time talking about Monica Ray, and that's fine, but I think that that's an excellent point about that relationship.
Well, I don't think that it's a point of their investigative relationship that gets brought up much in discussion from what I've heard, just in general. I think people talk about that relationship more in the terms that we've talked about, like with William or with the conspiracy or the ongoing narrative of the show, but not necessarily, really not even necessarily in terms of like the working relationship.
Well, and I mean, spoiler alert, when we talked to Annabeth, we definitely talked a little bit about that now not only do we have one strong female character working as an FBI agent, but now we've got two, and they're going to work together. Mm-hmm. And so it's,
Yeah.
And they're two such different personalities, which kind of is nice from just a perspective of relating to them.
And I think they both work out of the strength of their personalities the most when they're working together in that era of the show. It's kind of like, to me, it's a little bit like when Mulder and Scully would discuss a case from their different perspectives, and they had a really good story about that. When Scully and Reyes are working together and like really discussing something, I think you see the strengths of both of them. So yeah, that would be fun to hear whenever that comes
sometime.
Yeah,
it might even be before this comes out. So awkward. I don't know.
It possibly, yeah. I'm going to say likely.
Yeah, who knows?
Andy Blaker says that Scully is never really seen with close friends, and he mentions the lady Ellen in the Jersey Devil, and he said she always struck me as a bit of a loner. Even in her interactions with other females in her profession, she comes across as somewhat distant or aloof. She's guarded, and she says she's distrustful of her own. She can be distrustful of her own emotions, and I think that's what shows through. And he just says she's very focused and dedicated to her work, and in turn with Mulder. He also talks about her devotion to her family. And then with Reyes, they form a closer bond through virtue of working together for some time. He says, I've always seen her as maintaining a degree of professionalism with females she worked with, as would be the case with any good agent. Sort of personality just related to like the perception of her doing a good job, I guess.
I think it's maybe more noticeable. Like, I think he described Scully as being like a little bit of a loner, and it's maybe a little more noticeable because Mulder's like a loner from the beginning. Whereas Scully sort of has a couple friends at the beginning, but then, I don't know, maybe you just notice it more.
Or she kind of comes out as a loner, I would say, almost.
Right.
Like later on.
She's like a little more
she seems
normal, in quotes, at the beginning.
Yeah. And I always wonder, it seems like those were good and pleasant friendships, but how much of that was just whatever was left over from the past and just like people that she knew that she was friendly with? But it just seems like there's a little bit of, I don't mean pretense in a bad way, but not necessarily.
At a certain point, I'm not sure how you talk to other people about things that you experience on that. Like if you're Scully, how do you talk to people who don't live through the X-Files about the things that happen to you on the X-Files? I don't know. I think that would be difficult.
And these things that just typically happen like on a Tuesday, which are like so far outside anyone else's experience.
Yeah, like normal social life.
But I think, too, that goes back to his point about her relationship with Monica Reyes. They can talk about it because that happens to both of them. I mean, to different degrees.
And she's kind of a loner, mentioned a little bit with her family as well. I mean, she's sort of the one that, you get the sense that she's the one that, it's like a loving family, but she doesn't quite fit in some regards. And it's hard to say, like, did that come about because of work, or she always been a little bit like that? I guess I've taken it as showing that she's always been a little bit that way, though.
I wonder how much of it, too, is if she's still, like, she thinks her father was disappointed. I don't know if she thinks, like, her family just doesn't understand what she does, or if they're still a little, disappointed with her.
And then he ends by saying she and Mulder, or Scully and Mulder, are both outsiders, due in some part to their personalities, professional aims, and the nature of their work. So.
Some good comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. It's interesting, too, to think about, like, how much are we missing of the personal just because the focus of the show, like Cortlan was talking about earlier. Or not missing, but it's just not part of the story.
It's just not part of the, what we see.
You have to extrapolate it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And every person watching is going to have a slightly different, like, personal experience. So, like, someone might see it differently than someone else sees it. So it's...
Oh, yeah. Like, I tend to think of things in terms of, like, more personalities or internal psychological factors and not... And, like, secondarily in terms of societal roles. But there are other people that have a very different perception based on either just experience or the way they think. So I think it's really interesting to put all that together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And look at any character. Did any of you have any other things, or are we pretty much exhausted the topic?
I think we covered a lot.
We did. We
Yeah,
covered a lot.
Okay, well, where can our listeners find you online? We'll start with you, Deana.
You can find me on Twitter at DeanutButter. So it's basically peanut butter, one word, with a D instead of a P. And, of course, in the XCast basement on Facebook.
Katie, how about you?
I'm also on Twitter sometimes, mostly talking X-Files, at Designer Doe. And then I'm also in the basement looking at all the fun polls and all the, picture postings and episode rewatches. So it's a great place.
Okay. Cortlan, what about you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CWB. It's actually my initials, all spelled out. So CEEDOUBLEUBE. It's long, sorry. You can just search for my name and you'll find it. And also on Facebook in the basement.
Pretty much the same for me. Marlene MHS on Twitter, I think. And then in the basement group, Marlene Stemme discussing the X-Files. So thank you guys for the conversation, and thanks listeners for tuning in. And until next time, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. Cerebral Jukebox.
I think as I've got older, I don't care what people think of my music taste anymore. I'm happy to admit that, I really missed the boat because, in the 2000s, I was moody, angsty teen, and I was Papa Roach in Linkin Park on the daily. And I'd be ashamed to admit that I kind of like Savage Garden and Craig David, and I had this very strange diet. But now I go back and listen to all these 2000s UK garage tracks, and they were absolutely astounding.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast.
Maybe I'm not coming at it from an educated point of view because, not only am I a man, I'm gay. I don't deal with pregnancy.
Are you?
And
have you ever told us that before?
I was trying to make a serious point.
Hey, we love you know that.
Yeah. But yeah, you've got a good point, Colin. This is a bit of a sausage fest episode. Maybe we should have got a lady involved.
The Movie Palace.
This is a film you'd seen before we decided to discuss these two. Is that right? This was a rewatch for you?
No, this was a first-time viewing. Bells of St. Mary's, I watched for the first time last Christmas and really enjoyed it. And I had heard many things about the first one, especially how it had, swept at the Oscars, but I had never watched it. So when we started to discuss, a film to talk about for the holidays, I thought this is a great excuse to watch the first one.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our Xcast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the Xcast. That's Patreon.com/the patreon.com/thexcast. We'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.